and welcome to an explanation of the techniques used in operant conditioning. This is the fourth in a series of 6 presentations on behavioral learning theories as they are applied to schooling and education. My name is Bill Hewitt, and I'm Professor Emeritus at Valdosta State University and adjunct faculty at Capella and Walden Universities. The primary objective for this presentation is for you to be able to analyze case studies and properly describe the 4 components used in operant conditioning: identifying the target behavior, making a decision as to the desired change in the target behavior, that is, should the target behavior be increased or decreased, identifying the consequence used, that is it a positive or negative stimulus, and identifying what action to take with the stimulus, that is the stimulus to be added or subtracted. These are the questions to ask when identifying what operant conditioning technique was used in each of the examples discussed in this presentation. First, what was the target behavior, and was the frequency of the behavior increased or decreased? Remember that there are 2 operant conditioning techniques associated with each of these possible results. Therefore, the answers to these 2 questions will eliminate 2 possible techniques. What was the stimulus used? What action was taken with the stimulus? That is, was it added or subtracted? To the answer to these questions will eliminate another possible technique, thereby identifying the operant conditioning technique used in the example. In the first example, Billy likes to camp out in the backyard. He camped out on every Friday evening during the month of June. The last time he camped out, some older children snuck up into his tent while he was sleeping and threw a bucket of cold water on him. Billy has not camped out since. First, what was the target behavior? That's right. The target behavior in this example is camping out. Second, was the target behavior increased or decreased? Correct again. The target of camping out was decreased. So we know that positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement can be eliminated as possible techniques used in the example because both of those techniques increase the frequency of the target behavior. Next, what was the consequence used? Right. The consequence was the cold water thrown on him by the older children. Was the water added or subtracted? Right again, it was added. So, we know that the technique of punishment was used. A negative stimulus, the cold water, was added by the older children, resulting in a decrease in camping out behavior. This is an example of operant conditioning because a stimulus following a response changed the frequency of the response being emitted again. A second example. At the beginning of the week, Madge raised her hand 3 times when the teacher asked a question. She then began calling on Madge every time Madge raised her hand. During the next class, Madge raises her hand 4 times. In the following class, she raises her hand 5 times. First, what was the target behavior? Did you say Madge raising her hand? Excellent. Next, was the target behavior of raising hand increased or decreased? Right. Madge increased her raising her hand behavior. So, we can eliminate 2 possible operant conditioning techniques, response cost and punishment, because those techniques result in a decrease in the frequency of the target behavior. Next, what was the consequence in this example? It was a teacher calling on Madge. Was the stimulus added or subtracted? Right, the teacher added the stimulus of calling on Madge. So now we know that the operant conditioning used was not negative reinforcement because that would have involved subtracting a negative or aversive stimulus to increase the frequency of a target behavior, and therefore this is an example of positive reinforcement. A positive stimulus of calling on Madge was added, resulting in an increase in Madge's raising her hand behavior. In the third example, Greg is being conditioned using a token system. When he follows directions, he earns a point. When he misbehaves or does not follow a request, he loses points. At the end of each day, he can use his points or tokens to buy free time, TV privileges, and so forth. Greg used to call his mom names. Since he's been on the point system, his name calling has been reduced to almost zero. What was the target behavior? Correct. The target behavior is Greg calling his mother names. Was the target behavior increased or decreased? That's right. The frequency of the target behavior was decreased. Positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement can be eliminated as possible techniques used in the example because both of those techniques increase the frequency of the target behavior. And therefore, the technique used was either response cost or punishment, because both of those techniques focus on decreasing a target behavior. In this example, what was the consequence? Right. Points were deducted when Greg called his mom names. Were the points added or subtracted? They were subtracted. Therefore, we know that the technique used was not punishment. In fact, the technique used was response cost. Greg had points deducted for calling his mom names, which resulted in a decrease in that target behavior. Astute learners will notice that Greg both received points for appropriate behavior and had points deducted for inappropriate behavior. If the example were changed to read, Greg used to never raise his hand before he spoke. Since he has been on the point system, he raises his hand almost every time and waits to be called on, the technique used would have changed. In this case, the target behavior is Greg raising his hand and waiting to be called on, and that target behavior was increased. The consequence is receiving points, and these are added when he behaves appropriately. So now this is an example of positive reinforcement. Points are added when Greg behaves appropriately, resulting in an increase in that behavior. When deciding how to use operant conditioning, it is critical to go through the steps of identifying the target behavior, deciding whether it should be increased or decreased, and then deciding on a stimulus and whether that should be added or subtracted to attain the desired outcome. Otherwise, operant conditioning can become rather confusing. In the final example, John does not go to the dentist every 6 months for his checkup. When he finally went, the teeth cleaning was so painful that his mouth hurt for several days. After the second time he did this, he now has his teeth cleaned every 6 months. What was the target behavior? Correct. The target behavior is going to the dentist to have his teeth cleaned. Was the going to the dentist increased or decreased? That's right, it was increased. So we can eliminate two possible operant conditioning techniques, response cost and punishment, because those techniques result in a decrease in a frequency of the target behavior. What was the consequence? Right, the consequence was his mouth hurting for several days. Was the consequence added or subtracted? The mouth hurting was subtracted. So we can eliminate positive reinforcement, as that would involve adding a pleasant stimulus. Therefore, this is an example of negative reinforcement. When going to the dentist, behavior was increased. The negative stimulus of mouth hurting for several days was subtracted. In summary, it is always best to use positive reinforcement if possible. This includes selecting a target behavior that you want to increase and identifying a pleasant or positive stimulus that you can add when the target behavior or its near approximation is emitted. Remember, if the target behavior does not change, it does not mean that operant conditioning does not work. It simply means you have identified a neutral stimulus, not a consequence. If the learner is not emitting any behavior that can be modified into a target behavior, the next choice is to use negative reinforcement. Using this technique, you would first place the learner in a negative or aversive situation from which the learner can escape or avoid by engaging in the target behavior. When the target behavior is emitted, the negative or aversive stimulus is removed, at which point you can now use positive reinforcement to increase the frequency of the behavior even more. It is best to focus on increasing behavior. However, there are times when decreasing an inappropriate or undesirable target behavior is warranted. It is best to first use response cost by removing a pleasant or a positive stimulus when the learner engages in the unwanted target behavior. When the desired behavior is emitted, then that same consequence can be given to the learner to increase the desired target behavior. Finally, if punishment is warranted, that is the only technique that works to decrease an unwanted behavior, the negative stimulus that is added should be something that can be removed when a desired target behavior is emitted. Notice that in using operant conditioning, any focus on reducing an unwanted target behavior must be paired with increasing a complementary desired target behavior. For example, if a teacher wants to reduce a child calling out answers before he is called on, a focus on reducing that behavior should be paired with increasing raising one's hand behavior. Reducing inappropriate or undesirable behavior does not automatically lead to an increase in the desired target behavior. That desired target behavior must be conditioned. This concludes the presentation on using operant conditioning techniques. Previous presentations focused on an overview of 3 behavioral learning theories: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and contiguity theory, a more complete introduction to classical conditioning theory, and an overview of operant conditioning theory. The next presentation provides an introduction to schedules for applying consequences. Then there's a summary presentation on using behavior modification techniques from both classical and operant conditioning theories. Additionally, there are several short quizzes that learners can use to check their understandings of the different learning theories.